One moment, she's living a quiet, steady life, teaching children and caring for her father. The next, she's thrust into a grand mansion, married to a man she barely knows, surrounded by wealth, rules, and secrets. But behind the polished walls lie hidden deals, a town at risk, and a web of betrayal she never saw coming. As she uncovers the truth, she realizes this punishment might be the only chance to save the people she loves, and maybe even herself. Can a forced marriage turn into a path for justice, hope, and unexpected love? Or will everything crumble before it begins? The late summer sun streamed through the windows of room 12, casting warm rectangles of light across the worn wooden floor. Eleanor Ellie Mercer moved between the desks, her sensible shoes making soft squeaks against the linoleum as she checked her students' progress on their reading comprehension worksheets. "Ms. Mercer," a small voice called from the back. "Bear is hurt again." Ellie turned to find Sophie, one of her quietest third graders, holding up a well-loved teddy bear with stuffing poking out from its arm. The girl's bottom lip trembled slightly. "Don't worry, sweetie. I have just the thing." Ellie retrieved her trusty sewing kit from her desk drawer. She'd learned years ago that teaching required being part nurse, part counselor, and part repair service. As she stitched the bear's arm with neat, tiny stitches, Sophie watched with wide eyes. "There you go. Good as new." Ellie handed the bear back with a warm smile. Sophie hugged it close, mumbling a shy, "Thank you," before scurrying back to her seat. The morning progressed with its familiar rhythm, math lessons, story time, and the controlled chaos of recess. While the children played outside, Ellie slipped around to the back of the building, where a scraggly brown dog waited hopefully. She'd first noticed him 3 weeks ago, and had been bringing him bits of her lunch ever since. "Here you go, buddy," she whispered, setting down some turkey from her sandwich. The dog wagged his tail gratefully. The classroom phone rang just as the children were settling back in after recess. Ellie knew who it was before she answered. Her father never missed his daily check-in call. "Hi, Dad," she said, turning slightly away from the class. "Eleanor?" Thomas Mercer's voice carried its usual mix of gruffness and concern. "Just making sure everything's all right." "Everything's fine. We're having a good day." She watched as Jimmy struggled with his reading assignment, making a mental note to work with him after class. "I'll be home a little late, staying to help some students." "Don't work too hard," he said, his tone softening slightly. "And don't bicycle home in the dark." "I won't, Dad. See you soon." She hung up and returned to her students, crouching beside Jimmy's desk. "Need some help with those tricky words?" After the final bell, Ellie spent an hour working with Jimmy and 2 other students who needed extra support with their reading. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, turning the classroom golden. She loved these quiet moments, watching young faces light up as they conquered challenging words. When she finally packed up her bag, the school halls were empty except for the distant sound of the janitor's vacuum. She wheeled her bicycle out from the rack, adjusting her messenger bag across her chest. The air had that particular September sweetness that seemed special to small towns, a mix of dry leaves, distant wood smoke, and the promise of autumn. As she pedaled through town, strings of lights were being hung across the square for the Harvest Festival. Mr. Peterson wobbled on a ladder while his wife directed from below. The local hardware store had already set up their pumpkin display, and the sound of someone testing a microphone drifted from the bandstand. "Ellie, hold up!" She braked at the familiar voice and found Marta Alvarez waving from the library steps. Her friend hurried over, her reading glasses hanging from their chain around her neck. "Are you coming to the festival tonight?" Marta asked, her dark eyes twinkling. "The whole town will be here. Even got that new band from over in Miller's Creek playing." "I don't know." Ellie hedged, thinking of her father waiting at home. "Dad's not much for crowds these days." Then leave him with his TV dinner and that history program he likes. Marta put her hands on her hips. You're allowed to have some fun, you know. Come on, I'll save you a spot at my table. 7 o'clock. Ellie smiled, recognizing the tone that meant resistance was futile. Okay. 7 o'clock. Good girl. Marta patted her arm. Now get home before Thomas sends out a search party. As Ellie pushed off again, the first strains of fiddle music floated across the square, the band warming up for tonight. Festival banners fluttered in the early evening breeze, their cheerful colors bright against the deepening sky. She could smell apple pies cooling in the diner's window and heard children's laughter as families began gathering for the evening's festivities. The thought of joining them later made her smile. Maybe Marta was right. She deserved a night out now and then. As she pedaled toward home, the sunset painted the clouds pink and gold, and the harvest moon was just beginning to rise, round and bright as a new penny. The Harvest Festival transformed the town square into a kaleidoscope of light and motion. String lights crisscrossed overhead like a canopy of stars, while the aroma of buttered popcorn and cinnamon-laden pies filled the evening air. Ellie adjusted the mason jar full of raffle tickets, smiling as Mrs. Henderson's granddaughter dropped in another handful. Miss Mercer, did you try the apple pie yet? Tommy from her class tugged at her sleeve, his face sticky with caramel apple. Not yet, but I heard your mum's is the one to beat this year. Ellie ruffled his hair as he darted back into the crowd. The old speakers crackled with Moon River, and couples swayed on the makeshift dance floor. Marta appeared with 2 paper cups of hot cider, passing one to Ellie. Your dad just pulled up, she said, nodding toward the parking lot. Thought he wasn't coming? Ellie turned to see her father making his way through the crowd. Something was off about his posture, shoulders tight, hands thrust deep in his pockets. That's what he told me this morning. Thomas reached their table, barely acknowledging Marta's greeting. His face looked drawn in the festival lights. Eleanor, I need to speak with you, privately. Dad, I'm helping with the raffle. I'll watch the table. Marta interrupted, squeezing Ellie's arm. Go on. Thomas led her behind the gazebo, away from the music and laughter. Paper streamers rustled overhead like whispers. In the distance, the first firework burst with a hollow boom, painting the sky in gold sparks. What's going on? Ellie asked, wrapping her arms around herself against the evening chill. You're scaring me. Her father's face was half in shadow. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago. His voice cracked. I made a terrible mistake, Eleanor, back when you were just starting college. Another firework illuminated his face. She saw tears in his eyes. The paper mill was failing. I was on the board. We had a chance to sell to a bigger company, but instead... He drew a shuddering breath. I convinced the other board members to strip the assets and sell them off piece by piece. We all made money, but the workers, our neighbors, lost everything. Pensions, healthcare, jobs they'd held for decades. Ellie stared at him, her mind racing back to that time. The wave of foreclosures, families moving away, the hollow look in people's eyes. You told me the mill failed because of foreign competition. I've spent 20 years trying to make it right, anonymously helping where I could, but it's not enough. His words tumbled out faster now. That's why when Harrison Caldwell approached me last month, when he expressed interest in you. Interest in me? The words felt foreign on her tongue. What are you talking about? He's a good man, Eleanor. Wealthy, influential. He can help restore what was lost. Create new jobs, rebuild... Dad. Ice crept into her voice. What did you do? Thomas wouldn't meet her eyes. I arranged a marriage between you and Harrison. The world tilted sideways. Fireworks boomed overhead, but Ellie could barely hear them over the roaring in her ears. You what? It's for the best, Eleanor. He can give you a good life, and together you can help heal this town. A good life. Her voice rose sharply. You sold me like a piece of property to ease your guilty conscience? Please understand. Understand that my own father thinks so little of me he'd trade me away without my knowledge or consent? Tears burned in her eyes. How dare you? How dare you make this choice for me? Eleanor! She backed away from him, nearly stumbling over a guy wire holding the gazebo's decorations. I'm 34 years old. I have my own life, my own choices. You don't get to sacrifice my future to atone for your past. Thomas stepped into the lamplight, his face etched with desperation. I will change your life. You already have. She spat. You've destroyed my trust in you. Ellie turned and fled across the darkened square, past the cheerful lights and confused faces, past Marta calling her name. She ran until her lungs burned, finally stopping at the corner of Maple and 3rd to catch her breath. The night air felt thick and close, like a wool blanket she couldn't shake off. Her bedroom ceiling offered no answers that night as she lay staring up at it, her father's words echoing in her head. The distant sounds of the festival cleaning crew filtered through her window. Metal chairs scraping concrete, trucks backing up, voices calling goodnight. Each sound seemed to mock the normalcy of a world that had just been turned inside out. She thought of her students, of the life she'd built here, of the quiet satisfaction she found in making small differences every day. And now her father wanted to trade it all away for some grand gesture of atonement. The night stretched endlessly. Somewhere around 3 a.m, she heard her father's heavy tread in the hallway, pausing outside her door. She held her breath until his footsteps moved away, taking with them any chance of sleep. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, but it brought no warmth to the breakfast table. Ellie stirred her untouched coffee, watching the liquid swirl into tiny whirlpools like the churning thoughts in her mind. The ceramic mug felt cool beneath her fingertips, despite having been poured nearly 20 minutes ago. Across from her, Thomas methodically spread butter on his toast, the scrape of his knife against bread the only sound between them. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision, a stark contrast to the uncertainty hanging in the air. When were you planning to tell me? Ellie finally asked, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. The day of the wedding? While I was walking down the aisle in some dress I never chose. Thomas set down his knife, the metal clinking against the plate. His eyes, so similar to her own, couldn't quite meet her gaze. I hoped you'd understand once I explained, that you'd see the bigger picture here. Understand what? That you traded my life away like it was yours to give? She pushed her coffee cup aside with enough force that a few drops spilled onto the worn tablecloth. I'm not a bargaining chip, Dad. I'm a person with my own dreams, my own choices. Did that even cross your mind when you were making this deal? The agreement is already signed, Thomas said quietly, running his fingers along the edge of his plate. Harrison has resources we need, connections that could help everyone who lost their pensions, their homes, people who trusted me and ended up with nothing. Don't you see what's at stake? Stop. Ellie held up her hand, her silver bracelet catching the sunlight. Just stop. Show me the agreement. I want to see exactly what you've committed me to. Thomas hesitated, his jaw tightening, then pushed back from the table. The chair legs scraped against the linoleum floor as he walked to his study. She could hear the creak of the old filing cabinet drawer, then his shuffling footsteps returning. He placed a thick manila envelope on the table, sliding it across with reluctance evident in the gesture. Ellie pulled out the documents, scanning the formal language with growing disbelief, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned each crisp page. This is dated 3 weeks ago. She looked up sharply, her eyes narrowing. You've been planning this for weeks? All those late-night phone calls, the business meetings, this is what you were doing? Harrison approached me after learning about the mill situation. He has a genuine interest in helping. Thomas leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. And in getting a wife, apparently. Ellie's tone was bitter, her words clipped. Did it occur to you that there are other ways to help people? Legal ways that don't involve selling your daughter like it's the 1800s? Grants, investments, community programs. Any of those sound familiar? Thomas's face flushed, red creeping up from his collar to his cheeks. I'm trying to make things right before I... He stopped abruptly, pressing his lips together. Before you what? Ellie's anger softened slightly, concern flickering across her face. She noticed the shadow behind his eyes, the slight droop of his shoulders. Dad, are you sick? Is there something you're not telling me? No. He waved off her concern with a dismissive gesture that seemed too quick, too practiced. But I'm not getting any younger. I need to know I've fixed what I broke. These people trusted me with their futures, Eleanor. I can't take that to my grave. Ellie studied her father's face, the new lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his coffee cup. She recognized the desperate need for redemption in his expression, a look she'd seen glimpses of over the years, but never this raw, this exposed. Taking a deep breath, she switched tactics, her practical nature surfacing through her anger. Okay, let's negotiate. Thomas blinked, confusion crossing his features. Negotiate? Yes, if you want me to consider this arrangement, I have conditions. She pulled a notepad from the kitchen drawer and began writing, her teacher's penmanship neat and deliberate. 1 year. That's all I'm willing to commit to. After that, I'm free to leave with no consequences, no strings attached, no financial penalties. But no interference from you in the marriage, no pressure about children or continuing beyond the year. Her pen moved quickly across the paper, making firm, decisive strokes. And I want explicit agreement from Harrison about mutual respect and boundaries. This isn't the Dark Ages. I won't be treated like property once the papers are signed. Thomas leaned forward, his breakfast forgotten. Eleanor, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. More reasonable than you deserve. She kept writing, her jaw set in the same stubborn line that Thomas himself often wore. I want financial transparency about how the restitution will be handled, and I want regular updates about who's being helped and how, names, amounts, timelines, everything. If I'm sacrificing a year of my life, I want to see real results. Harrison might not agree to such terms, Thomas said, a note of worry creeping into his voice. Then he's not the right person to fix this mess, is he? Ellie pushed the list across the table, the paper sliding on the smooth wood. These are my non-negotiable conditions. Take them or tear up the original agreement. Your choice, Dad. Thomas read through her terms slowly, his eyes lingering on certain phrases, his shoulders gradually slumping with each line. You've always been stubborn, he murmured, but there was a hint of pride in his voice, a reluctant admiration. I learned from the best. Ellie's expression softened just slightly, the familiar rhythm of their relationship momentarily overshadowing the betrayal. The morning stretched into afternoon as they refined the terms at the kitchen table. Cups of coffee were refilled and went cold again. Ellie insisted on clear language about her autonomy and right to maintain her teaching career, crossing out Thomas's vague wording and replacing it with precise terms. Thomas argued for certain social obligations, but ultimately conceded to her boundaries, recognizing the steel in his daughter's resolve. At 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang, its chime interrupting their discussion. Thomas rose to answer it, returning moments later with a cream-colored envelope. A courier in a pressed uniform stood on the porch, visible through the open door. Inside the envelope were 2 first-class tickets to New York and an elegantly engraved card on heavy stock paper. Miss Eleanor Mercer, your presence is requested tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. the Peninsula Hotel, 5th Avenue, Harrison, Caldwell. Ellie traced the raised letters with her finger, feeling each indentation against her skin. He certainly doesn't waste time. She set the card down, staring at the tickets. New York, tomorrow. He's awfully confident, isn't he? That evening, she stood in her bedroom, staring at her open closet, the warm glow of her bedside lamp casting long shadows across the floor. What did one pack for meeting their arranged marriage fiancé? Designer clothes she didn't own? Wedding magazines? She shook her head at the absurdity. She finally settled on her best teaching clothes, a navy pencil skirt, crisp white blouse, and tailored blazer, professional but authentic to who she was. 1 suitcase, she decided. Nothing more. A silent statement about the temporary nature of this arrangement. As she folded a blue silk scarf her mother had given her before she died, smoothing the delicate fabric with gentle fingers, Thomas appeared in the doorway. He stood awkwardly, hands in his pockets, watching her methodical packing. "The car will be here at 6 tomorrow morning," he said, his voice gruff with unspoken emotion. Ellie nodded without looking up, tucking the scarf between layers of clothing. "I'll be ready. Eleanor." He hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Thank you for finding a way forward, for being stronger than I deserve." She closed the suitcase with a decisive click, the sound final and unyielding. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because someone needs to clean up this mess, and apparently I'm the only one thinking clearly about how." She finally met his eyes, her gaze steady. "The people who lost everything deserve better than empty promises." Thomas nodded and retreated, his footsteps heavy in the hallway, leaving Ellie alone with her thoughts and a single packed suitcase. She sat on the edge of her bed, running her fingers over the worn quilt her grandmother had made, wondering how her life had come to this crossroads. Outside her window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow would bring New York, Harrison, Caldwell, and a future she'd never imagined for herself. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to face whatever the morning would bring. The black town car glided away from Ellie's house before dawn had fully broken. She watched her father's figure grow smaller in the rear window, one hand raised in farewell. The familiar streets of her hometown scrolled past, Mrs. Chen watering her window boxes, the bakery's lights already glowing warm, Pete the crossing guard doing his morning stretches. As they left town, the landscape opened into rolling farmland painted in late summer colors. Corn stretched tall in neat rows, and hay bales dotted golden fields like giant chess pieces. Ellie pressed her forehead against the cool glass, trying to memorize every detail of home. The driver, a silent man named Rogers, guided the car onto the highway. Hours passed as suburbs gave way to increasingly manicured estates. When they turned onto a private road, Ellie's breath caught. Through wrought iron gates decorated with elaborate C's, a mansion rose like something from another world. "Welcome to Caldwell Estate, Miss Mercer," Rogers said, his first words of the trip. The driveway curved past perfectly trimmed hedges and fountains that sparkled in the morning sun. Ellie's practical ballet flats seemed suddenly inadequate as they crunched on, pristine gravel. The mansion loomed closer, 3 stories of pale stone with countless windows staring down at her like judging eyes. Inside, her shoes clicked against marble floors, polished to mirror brightness. A butler appeared silently to take her modest suitcase. Staff members moved with precise efficiency, hardly glancing at her as they went about their duties. Their coordinated movements reminded Ellie of the mechanical clock in the town square, everything ticking in perfect, soulless rhythm. "This way, Miss Mercer." The butler led her up a grand staircase. Oil paintings of stern-faced Caldwells watched her ascent, their eyes following her progress. She counted 3 generations of men with the same sharp jawline and remote expression. The drawing room where Harrison waited was a study in controlled elegance. Cream-colored walls soared to ornate ceiling moldings. Every surface gleamed with careful polish, and even the air seemed filtered of dust. A fire burned precisely in the marble fireplace, though the morning wasn't cold. Harrison Caldwell stood as she entered. He was tall and lean, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his silver-threaded hair precisely combed. Not a single detail was out of place. "Miss Mercer," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm but brief. "Please, sit." A maid materialized with a tea service on a silver tray. Harrison waited until Ellie was served before speaking again. "I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Yes, thank you." Ellie watched him measure exactly 1 spoon of sugar into his cup. Everything about him spoke of careful control, from his measured movements to his modulated voice. "Your father explained the situation?" His tone was neutral, professional. His version of it. Ellie met his gaze directly. "I'd like to hear yours." Something flickered in Harrison's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at her directness, but his voice remained even. "Your father approached me about making amends for past actions. I have the resources to help, and I find myself in need of a partnership arrangement." The careful choice of words didn't mask the underlying transaction, but Ellie noticed something else, a shadow that crossed his face when he mentioned partnership, a slight tightening around his mouth. There was pain there, carefully contained. Their conversation stayed within safe boundaries, logistics, schedules, expectations. Harrison was unfailingly polite, but maintained his distance, as if an invisible wall separated them. When her phone buzzed with Thomas's call, Ellie excused herself to a window alcove. "Are you there safely?" Thomas asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, Dad. Eleanor." He paused. "Remember why you agreed. This isn't just about us anymore." "I know." Ellie watched a gardener meticulously trimming a hedge into geometric perfection. "I haven't forgotten." That evening, a different maid led Ellie to her new rooms in the East Wing. The suite was larger than her entire house back home, decorated in shades of blue and cream. Everything was beautiful, coordinated, and somehow hollow. Ellie unpacked her small suitcase, laying out her teaching clothes in the massive closet. From her bag, she pulled out a small ceramic bluebird, a gift from one of her students. She placed it on the marble mantel, its cheerful imperfection standing out against the room's careful perfection. Night fell, bringing unfamiliar shadows and sounds. The house creaked and settled around her, its rhythms strange and echoing. Ellie lay in the too large bed, listening to distant footsteps in hallways, the soft whir of central air, the ticking of an antique clock. Over the next week she learned the mansion's patterns. Breakfast appeared precisely at 7, newspapers ironed and folded just so. Harrison left for his office at 8, returning at 6. Staff moved in choreographed routines, keeping the massive house running like a complex machine. She observed her future husband from a careful distance. Harrison was unfailingly courteous but rarely smiled. He spent evenings in his study with endless documents and phone calls. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, his shoulders would slump slightly, and that carefully maintained mask would slip, revealing glimpses of a deeper sorrow. Ellie established her own quiet routines. Morning walks in the formal gardens, afternoons reading in the library, evening tea in her sitting room. She wrote lesson plans for her substitute teacher and sent cheerful postcards to her students. But each night she still lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar house breathe, wondering what changes the next week would bring. The mansion's routines ticked like a precise clock, but Ellie found ways to soften its edges. On her third morning, she noticed the elderly groundskeeper hunched over his work in the misty dawn, shoulders curved from decades of labor, fingers working methodically despite the morning chill. The next day she left a plate of homemade shortbread cookies, golden brown and still warm from the oven, alongside a thermos of hot coffee, steam rising in gentle curls on the garden wall where he would surely find them. His weathered face, lined with years of outdoor work, crinkled with surprise when he discovered the unexpected offering. "Been here 30 years," he told her later, returning the empty thermos, a hint of wonder still lingering in his voice. "First time anyone's done that." His calloused hands cradled the empty container carefully, as if it represented something more significant than a simple kindness. The house held secrets in its quiet corners, whispers of stories untold behind its polished veneer. Wandering the east wing one afternoon, feet sinking into plush carpeting that muffled her footsteps, Ellie discovered a room that must have been a nursery once. Now it served as a library, meticulously organized and impeccably maintained, but something felt off about the space. An emptiness that couldn't be filled with books. The walls were a faded blue beneath fresh cream paint, the original color peeking through in places where the new coat hadn't quite covered. Small holes marked where pictures had hung, tiny imperfections in the otherwise flawless wall. Every shelf was filled with business books and financial journals, their leather spines gleaming under the soft lighting. Not a single children's story in sight, not one splash of imagination among the serious tomes. Sarah, the housekeeper's 8-year-old daughter with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile, visited on Wednesday afternoons while her mother worked. Ellie found her sitting alone in the kitchen, swinging her legs rhythmically against the wooden stool and working on homework, her small face pinched with concentration. "Would you like to hear a story?" Ellie asked, pulling out a well-loved book from her own collection, its pages soft from countless readings. Soon, Wednesday afternoons became their cherished routine. Sarah curled up next to Ellie on the cushioned window seat, her small body radiating warmth as they shared adventures about brave knights, battling fierce dragons and clever princesses outwitting wicked sorcerers. The kitchen felt warmer somehow, transformed by their voices rising and falling with the rhythm of the tales, their laughter echoing against the gleaming countertops and sparkling appliances. She noticed Martin, the old gardener with hands stained permanently green, and a slow, thoughtful way of speaking, eating lunch alone every day on a weathered bench beneath an ancient oak tree. On Thursday she made a large pot of vegetable soup, rich with colorful chunks of carrots, celery, and potatoes swimming in a savory broth, and had the kitchen packet in a thermal container with fresh bread, crusty on the outside and pillowy within. When the staff delivered it to his small cottage at the edge of the property, she watched from an upstairs window as his face lit up with surprise and gratitude, one hand reaching up to remove his cap in a gesture of thanks. Harrison remained harder to read, his emotions locked behind a wall of practiced professionalism. But Ellie began noticing small cracks in his careful facade. A silver-framed photograph lay face down in his desk drawer when she delivered some papers requiring his signature. She caught a fleeting glimpse of a small boy's smile, bright and innocent, before Harrison quickly closed the drawer with an almost protective motion. In the study, a worn teddy bear, its fur rubbed thin in places from years of holding, sat hidden behind leather-bound books as if banished from sight but impossible to discard. Every evening at precisely 6:15, Harrison paused at the same window overlooking the back garden, his expression distant and pained, lost in memories that clearly haunted him still. One night, passing his study while returning from the kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea, she heard muffled sounds that made her pause mid-step. The door was slightly ajar, spilling warm lamplight into the dark hallway like a golden path. Through the crack she saw Harrison at his massive mahogany desk, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, face buried in his hands, his carefully constructed composure completely shattered. Ellie knocked softly, concern overriding her instinct to preserve his privacy. "Harrison, are you all right?" Her voice was gentle, barely above a whisper. The transformation was immediate and startling. He straightened his posture, wiped his eyes with a swift, practiced motion, and turned to her with his usual controlled expression, though the mask was hastily applied. "Just reviewing some contracts. Did you need something?" His voice betrayed only the slightest tremor. "No, She hesitated, seeing the raw grief still evident in his reddened eyes, noticing how his hands trembled slightly before he clasped them together. "Would you like some tea? I just made some, and there's plenty." "That won't be necessary." His tone was polite, but final, rebuilding the walls between them brick by brick. "Good night, Miss Mercer." The dismissal was clear, though not unkind. 7 days into her stay, Ellie was reading in the library, surrounded by the smell of old books and furniture polish, when a magazine slipped from between 2 heavy volumes and landed on her lap. It was an old issue of Regional Business Quarterly, its glossy cover slightly faded with time. A bright yellow sticky note marked an article about Caldwell Enterprises' Urban Development Initiative, the corner dog-eared as if frequently revisited. The words jumped out at her like accusations: aggressive buyout strategy, mandatory relocation, streamlined eviction process. The article praised Harrison's efficient handling of a neighboring district's renewal, complete with photographs of him cutting ribbons at sleek new buildings. But between the lines, Ellie read a different story. Families displaced from homes they'd lived in for generations, tight-knit communities scattered to the winds, lives upended by corporate decisions made in rooms like this one, far removed from their consequences. Her stomach churned with discomfort, the tea she'd been enjoying suddenly bitter on her tongue. The careful politeness of the house suddenly felt suffocating, like a beautiful mask hiding something ugly. What other consequences lay buried beneath all this perfect order? 2 days later, armed with growing unease and determination, she began digging deeper, searching through files and news archives, determined to understand exactly what she'd agreed to be part of. The pristine mansion no longer seemed simply lonely. It felt complicit in something darker, each pristine corridor leading to more questions. Every polished surface reflected back doubts she couldn't ignore, showing her own troubled expression alongside the gleaming evidence of wealth built on decisions she was beginning to question. As she traced her fingers along the spines of business journals, searching for more information in the hushed library, Ellie wondered what other stories these walls kept silent. What pain was hidden behind the immaculate facades and perfect gardens of Harrison's carefully controlled world? The estate's groundskeeper, Mr. Peterson, shifted uncomfortably as he guided Ellie through the narrow streets of Oakhaven. The neighborhood sat in the shadow of gleaming new development projects, its modest homes wearing decades of dignity despite peeling paint and creaking porches. Sunshine glinted off distant glass towers that seemed to stare down at the small community, their modern silhouettes a stark reminder of what was coming. "Most folks here have been living in these houses 30, 40 years," Mr. Peterson explained, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel of his old pickup truck. Deep creases lined his sun-browned face as he slowed to wave at an elderly man sweeping his walkway. My sister used to live just down that street before the notices came. Had the prettiest rose garden you ever saw. Now it's just dirt waiting for bulldozers. Ellie's heart sank as they passed empty lots where homes once stood. Yellow notices fluttered on doors like warning flags, their official-looking print visible even from the street. Children played in yards that might soon be vacant, their laughter a stark contrast to the worry lines on their parents' faces. A group of boys kicked a soccer ball in a dusty lot, oblivious to the future sight of luxury condominiums sign looming behind them. They stopped in front of a small blue bungalow with cheerful flower pots lining the steps. Despite the circumstances, someone had carefully tended marigolds and petunias that burst with colour against the worn siding. Mrs. Landry, a silver-haired woman in her 70s, opened the door before Ellie could knock. Her eyes were kind but tired, crow's feet deepening as she squinted against the afternoon light. "I saw you coming," she said, ushering them inside with a gentle hand on Ellie's arm. Not many visitors these days, except those men in suits with their papers. Always papers, never answers. She patted Mr. Peterson's shoulder like an old friend. The living room was neat but crowded with memories. Photographs covering every wall in mismatched frames, carefully arranged knickknacks on doily-covered surfaces, and a grandfather clock that Mrs. Landry said had been her wedding gift. The steady tick-tock filled the quiet moments between conversation, a heartbeat in the home. "Third generation in this house," Mrs. Landry explained, serving them tea in delicate cups with hand-painted violets. Her wedding ring clinked against the porcelain as she poured. "My Henry built that back porch himself when I was expecting our second. We sat out there every summer evening, raised our children here." Her hands trembled as she pointed to the notice pinned to her corkboard. The dear paper's crisp whiteness standing out against faded family cards and recipe clippings. Then last month, this arrives, like we're just an inconvenience to be cleared away. Ellie examined the document, leaning forward to read the small print. Corporate letterhead, dense legal language designed to intimidate, and a stark bottom line. Property acquisition required. 60 days to respond. The signature at the bottom was an illegible scrawl, not even a real name to contact. "They sent an appraiser," Mrs. Landry continued, pulling out a folder stuffed with papers, its edges worn from constant handling. "Young man who didn't even come inside, just walked around with his tablet, taking pictures. Said the market value was less than half what the realtor told me last year." She spread the papers on her coffee table. Assessment notices, certified letters, legal warnings that made little sense to anyone without a law degree. "I tried calling the number they gave, but it's always a different person. Nobody can explain what's really happening. One day they say it's for commercial space, the next it's luxury housing. All I know is it's not for folks like us." Mrs. Landry's voice cracked as she walked Ellie through her home. Each room held stories that tumbled out as they passed. Her daughter's first steps by the fireplace, Christmas mornings around the dining table, a lifetime of ordinary moments that had built something extraordinary. That cabinet was my mother's, too big for any apartment. Where would I even put it? She ran her fingers along the carved wood. The rose bushes my Henry planted when each grandchild was born. The maple tree that turned so bright in fall you'd think it was on fire. How do you put a price on those? Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. In the kitchen, Mrs. Landry showed Ellie a list she'd started in a spiral notebook. Things I can't leave behind. The careful handwriting catalogued items that meant nothing to corporate spreadsheets, but everything to one woman's heart. Each entry was meticulously numbered, as if quantifying the unquantifiable might somehow make the impossible bearable. Wedding china from my Aunt Martha. Henry's workbench in the garage with his tools still hanging where he left them. The height marks of the children on the doorframe, Bobby grew 3 inches the summer he turned 12. The view of the maple tree from my bedroom window. I've woken up to that tree every morning for 46 years. Back at the estate that evening, Ellie's borrowed finery felt like a costume, the soft fabric suddenly scratchy against her skin. The sprawling mansion with its manicured lawns seemed to mock the modest homes she'd visited. She requested a meeting with Ms. Reynolds, Harrison's Director of Philanthropic Initiatives, suggesting the estate could host community programs, a small bridge between worlds that felt galaxies apart. Ms. Reynolds arrived in a crisp charcoal suit, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floors. She was armed with glossy brochures and practiced smiles that never quite reached her eyes. They sat in the formal parlor, where everything was too clean, too perfect, like a museum display of how the wealthy lived rather than a space where real people existed. "We're absolutely committed to community enhancement," Ms. Reynolds assured her, sliding forward a presentation folder embossed with the Caldwell logo. "Our long-term strategic plan includes significant investment in public spaces, parks, libraries, community centers, all state-of-the-art." Her manicured finger tapped a rendering of children playing in a pristine park that existed only in an architect's imagination. "What about existing communities?" Ellie pressed, thinking of Mrs. Landry's trembling hands. "Places like Oak Haven, people who've built their lives there?" Ms. Reynolds' smile didn't waver, though something hardened in her gaze. "We're implementing a comprehensive transition strategy. The area has been designated for necessary urban renewal. These changes will benefit everyone in the long run." "Necessary for whom?" Ellie leaned forward, her tea untouched. "Progress requires change," Ms. Reynolds replied, smoothly, crossing her legs at the ankle. "We're offering fair market compensation and relocation assistance. Our team works tirelessly to ensure minimal disruption during this transitional period." Every answer was wrapped in corporate jargon that explained nothing while sounding reasonable. When Ellie mentioned Mrs. Landry by name, Ms. Reynolds responded with statistics about property values and development potential, as if human stories could be reduced to data points on a chart. That night, Ellie began taking notes, unable to sleep with Mrs. Landry's list playing in her mind. She spread papers across her bedroom floor, public records downloaded at the local library, news clippings about urban renewal, anything she could find about Caldwell Enterprises development projects. Over the next 3 days, she created a timeline, mapping out when the notices began, which properties were targeted first, how the proposals changed with each new phase. She used colored pins and string on a map she'd taped to her wall, creating a visual representation of the creeping displacement. She noted patterns. Smaller homes approached first. Elderly residents seemed to receive more pressure. Paperwork arrived in overwhelming waves designed to confuse and exhaust. The fair market values offered seemed to drop after each refusal, a punishment for resistance. Behind the official language lurked an unspoken threat: accept our terms or face worse ones. In her notebook, Ellie recorded conversations with other residents. Mr. Chen, whose family grocery had served the neighborhood for 40 years, now watching customers dwindle as homes emptied. The Martinez family, whose children attended the same school Ellie's students did, wondering if they should transfer before the school year ended. Pastor Williams, whose congregation had shrunk by half, leaving collection plates emptier each Sunday. Each story added weight to her growing concern. Each face made the abstract concept of progress painfully human. The estate's perfect silence felt heavier now as Ellie lay awake at night. She could hear every tick of the antique clock, every rustle of expensive sheets. Every luxury seemed purchased at someone else's cost. The marble countertops, the crystal chandeliers, the perfectly manicured gardens where no child played. As Ellie compiled her research, carefully organizing evidence in a binder, she couldn't help but wonder How many other neighborhoods had disappeared beneath the Caldwell Company's definition of progress? How many Mrs. Landrys had been forced to decide which memories they could fit into an apartment? Back in her wing of the estate, Ellie transformed her sitting room into a makeshift investigation center. Stacks of documents covered every surface: corporate filings, newspaper clippings, and printouts from public records. Her laptop glowed in the dim light as she traced patterns through years of carefully worded announcements. The plush carpet beneath her was barely visible now, hidden beneath the sprawling paper trail that told a story few had bothered to piece together. She'd kicked off her shoes hours ago, her toes curling into the soft fibers as she worked with growing determination. Board meeting minutes revealed a steady progression. First came the subtle property acquisitions, then zoning changes pushed through during holiday sessions when public attendance was low. Lawrence Pierce's name appeared with increasing frequency, his influence spreading like ink through water. Each mention seemed innocent enough on its own, but together they painted a picture of calculated manipulation that made Ellie's stomach tighten. Advisory position on Sustainability Committee, board member of Heritage Trust, special consultant to Urban Renewal Initiative. Ellie muttered, highlighting each mention with a bright yellow marker that seemed to scream warnings from the page. She created a timeline on craft paper, connecting Pierce's appointments with corresponding drops in property values and sudden changes in development plans. Red yarn stretched between pushpins, creating a web of connections that grew more damning by the hour. Coffee cups accumulated beside her, the dregs growing cold as she lost track of time. The printer hummed steadily as she gathered more evidence. Property assessments that seemed deliberately undervalued. Zoning variances that bypassed normal channels. Meeting minutes where resident concerns were noted but never addressed. The faces of her neighbors flashed through her mind with each document: Mrs. Landry watering her window boxes, Mr. Chen stacking fresh produce outside his store. Real people whose lives were being shuffled around like pieces on a chessboard. During her second late night in the estate's library, Ellie discovered Pierce's connection to Vanguard Investment Partners, a firm that had purchased several properties through shell companies just before the redevelopment plans were announced. The leather chair creaked beneath her as she leaned forward, heart pounding at the significance of the find. The library's rich wood paneling and leather-bound volumes surrounded her like silent witnesses to her discovery. Her hands were smudged with printer ink, and her eyes burned from staring at screens when Harry's voice cut through her concentration. The grandfather clock in the corner had just chimed 11, its deep resonance still hanging in the air. Most people find our library rather dull. His tone was careful, measured. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light, his shoulders stiff beneath his tailored shirt. Ellie looked up from her work, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I find it quite enlightening, actually. The lamplight cast shadows across her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes. Those documents appear to be confidential. Harry stepped closer, his expression tightening as he recognized corporate letterhead. His polished shoes made soft sounds against the hardwood floor as he approached, hands in his pockets in a posture that seemed both casual and defensive. Public records aren't confidential, Ellie countered, straightening her spine. Neither are the stories of people losing their homes. She gestured to a photo of an elderly couple standing on their porch, their weathered faces full of worry. You don't understand the complexities of urban development and investment structures. I understand Mrs. Landry can't sleep because she doesn't know where she'll live next month. I understand Mr. Chen's grocery store feeds families that can't afford the fancy market across town. Ellie's voice remained steady but firm, her fingers gently tapping the documents before her. Those seem like simple truths to me. Harry's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching visibly. There are legal considerations, contractual obligations that can't simply be brushed aside. There are human considerations too. Ellie gathered her papers, stacking them with deliberate care. The rustle of pages filled the space between them. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't in any contract. That night she organized her findings into a clear report in her room. The bedside lamp cast a warm glow as she meticulously labeled sections. Evidence of Pierce's conflicts of interest, timeline of suspicious property deals, testimonies from affected residents. She added photographs. Children playing in yards soon to be bulldozed, elderly residents tending gardens they'd have to leave behind, the community center that had become a second home to so many. Each image told a story of connection and belonging that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. Just before midnight, with the hallways quiet and dark, Ellie slid the completed folder under Harry's office door. Her heart pounded as her fingertips lingered on the thick manila envelope. On top, she placed a simple note handwritten on cream stationery. Some responsibilities can't be delegated. Some decisions can't be undone, but it's never too late to choose differently. The words felt inadequate against the weight of what was at stake, but they were all she had to offer. She returned to her room, knowing the next move belonged to Harry. The estate's usual silence felt different now, less like peace and more like the quiet before a storm. She stood at her window for a long moment, looking out at the manicured grounds bathed in moonlight, so different from the modest neighborhoods fighting for survival just miles away. Over the next 2 days, small changes rippled through the mansion's routine. Harry's office light burned later than usual, a golden rectangle visible from the garden path, when Ellie took evening walks to clear her head. Urgent calls echoed behind closed doors, Harry's deep voice occasionally rising just enough to carry down the corridor. The usual parade of suited visitors increased, their voices carrying traces of tension as they hurried through the grand foyer with briefcases clutched tightly. Ellie waited, continuing her research at a small desk by her window, watching hummingbirds dart between flowering bushes as she compiled more resident testimonials. She knew that sometimes the hardest part of doing the right thing was giving someone else the space to choose it for themselves. The waiting was a test of her own faith in humanity, and in Harry's buried conscience that she believed was still there, beneath layers of privilege and protocol. 2 days after Ellie slipped the folder under Harry's door, she overheard him in his study with Charles Webber, the estate's chief financial officer. "I need a complete internal audit," Harry said, his voice carrying through the partially open door. "Every transaction, every approval, every document with Lawrence Pierce's name on it." "That could take weeks," Webber replied. "Then start now." While the audit began behind closed doors, Ellie refused to sit idle. She approached Harry with a proposal, her hands clasped to hide their trembling. "The estate library sits empty most days," she said. "I'd like to open it for community reading hours." Harry studied her for a long moment. "The liability, I'll handle the paperwork. And the organizing." Ellie pressed on. "Children need warm places to read. Seniors need somewhere to gather. The manor has space enough." To her surprise, he nodded once, curtly. Ellie called Marta that evening. "I need your help spreading the word. Nothing fancy, just books and welcome." "Count me in," Marta said. "I'll talk to Reverend June. She knows everyone who needs a warm place to be." Over the next few days, Ellie transformed the library. She pushed heavy leather chairs into cozy circles and spread colorful rugs across dark wood floors. She stocked a corner with children's books and set up a small table with tea and cookies. The first reading hour brought 12 children and 8 seniors. Mrs. Landry arrived in one of Harry's cars, sent to fetch her at Ellie's request. Her eyes were wide as she entered. "I never thought I'd see inside these walls," she whispered, touching the polished banister. children sprawled on their stomachs with picture books. A retired teacher helped a boy sound out words. Mrs. Landry read Winnie the Pooh to 3 little girls, her voice growing stronger with each page. Near the fireplace, 7-year-old Lucy Martinez worked intently with crayons. When she finished, she tugged Ellie's sleeve and handed her the drawing, a house with a red door and yellow flowers. "It's beautiful," Ellie said. "It's home," Lucy replied simply. Ellie pinned the drawing near the fireplace, where its bright colours stood out against the dark panelling. Harry appeared in the doorway partway through the afternoon. He stood rigid, hands clasped behind his back, watching. But slowly, as Mrs. Chen led the group in singing, "You Are My Sunshine," something in his face softened. A small boy named Tommy dropped his book and ran to retrieve it, bumping into Harry's legs. Instead of stepping back, Harry knelt and picked up the book. "Ah," he said, "Harold and the Purple Crayon. An excellent choice." Tommy beamed up at him. "Do you know it?" For a moment, Harry's composure cracked. A genuine smile spread across his face, small but real. "I used to read it to my—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Yes, I know it very well." Ellie watched as Harry helped Tommy back to his reading circle. When he straightened, their eyes met across the room. Something had shifted, like ice beginning to thaw. That evening, after the last guest had gone home, Harry found Ellie gathering scattered cushions. "The files you left," he said quietly. "I'm reviewing them personally, all of them." Ellie nodded, hope fluttering in her chest. "Thank you." Word spread quickly through the small town. By week's end, the reading hour was all anyone could talk about. The diner buzzed with conversation about the estate opening its doors. The grocery store checkout line hummed with whispered hope. "Did you hear? Mrs. Landry said there were cookies on real silver trays. My Tommy sat right next to Mr. Caldwell himself. Maybe things are changing up at the big house." Behind the scenes, Harry spent long hours in his study. Ellie glimpsed him through the doorway, surrounded by papers, his face grave as he worked through each document. The CFO came and went with boxes of files. Urgent phone calls echoed through the hallways. But in the library, Lucy's drawing still hung by the fireplace. Home, in crayon colours, watching over it all. The audit findings landed on Harry's desk with a heavy thud. His CFO Weber stood rigid, hands clasped behind his back. "Sir, you need to see this immediately." Harry opened the folder, his eyes scanning the first page. His jaw tightened. Page after page revealed Lawrence Pierce's fingerprints on aggressive buyout strategies. Properties targeted for redevelopment showed up in shell companies traced back to Pierce's private investment vehicles. "The memos," Weber said, pointing to a particular document. He was careful, but there's a pattern. Harry pulled out a stack of internal communications. Pierce's language was deliberately vague, but the implications were clear. He had pushed for specific properties while concealing his personal stake in their acquisition. Then Harry saw it. A single line in a memo marked "confidential" made his blood run cold. Ensure closure by Q4. Personal interest secured through Thompson Holdings LLC. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the paper. "Get Pierce in here. Now." When Lawrence Pierce walked in 30 minutes later, his usual smooth confidence was intact. "Harrison, what's the urgency?" Harry stood behind his desk, the damning document spread before him. "Explain Thompson Holdings." Pierce's smile flickered for just a moment. "A routine investment vehicle. Nothing remarkable. A vehicle you used to profit from properties you advised us to acquire." Harry's voice was deadly quiet. "While serving as our advisor. Now, Harrison, business is complex. Sometimes interests align. They don't align, Lawrence. They conflict." Harry pushed the memo across the desk. "You're suspended pending full investigation. Security will escort you out." Pierce's mask cracked. "You can't do this. I built half your father's empire. And you've been quietly dismantling it for your own gain. Harry pressed the intercom. Security to my office. As Pierce was led out, his face twisted with barely contained fury. You'll regret this, Harrison. Mark my words. The news broke fast. The local paper's business reporter, Jane Chen, published a piece praising the audit's transparency. Caldwell Estate shows leadership in ethics review, the headline declared. The article detailed the investigation's scope and highlighted Harry's swift response to irregularities. But by afternoon, whispers began circulating through town. An anonymous source had leaked suggestions that the timing was suspicious, that Harry's marriage to a local teacher was orchestrated PR to soften the blow of coming revelations. At the diner, Thomas Mercer's hands shook as he read the speculation on his phone. The words blurred before his eyes. Sources question convenient timing of Caldwell marriage. He called Ellie immediately. Have you seen what they're saying? Dad, breathe. Ellie said. It's just rumors. But what if people think, what if they find out? His voice cracked. Find out what? That you tried to protect the town? That you made mistakes and worked to fix them? Thomas fell silent, his fear of judgment warring with decades of guilt. Over the next 2 days, the mood in town shifted. Where there had been cautious hope after the reading hour, now skepticism crept in. Conversations at the grocery store turned wary. Mighty convenient timing, don't you think? Mrs. Peterson muttered to her neighbor. Marrying a local girl right before this mess breaks? At the hardware store, Bob Wilson shook his head. First the estate opens its doors. Now this? Something doesn't add up. Even at school, Ellie felt the change. Parents who had eagerly asked about the reading hour now gave her careful nods and turned away. Harry noticed too. During their brief dinner together, he watched Ellie push food around her plate. The rumors? He said finally. I'm sorry. Ellie set down her fork. Did you know? About Pierce? No. Harry's voice was firm. But I should have. I delegated too much, trusted too easily. He paused. Like my father before me. What happens now? The investigation continues. We'll find every deal Pierce touched, every document he altered. Harry's shoulders straightened. Whatever it costs. That evening, Ellie found Thomas sitting alone on his porch, staring into the darkness. I thought I was fixing things, he whispered. Making it right. Now everyone will know. Know what? That you cared enough to try? Ellie sat beside him. Dad, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Thomas covered his face with trembling hands. Decades of guilt and fear poured out in muffled sobs as Ellie held him, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. Inside the estate, Harry worked late into the night. Files covered his desk, evidence of Pierce's machinations, of trust betrayed, of homes and lives treated like numbers on a ledger. In the soft lamplight, he looked older, wearier, but determined. The town held its breath, waiting to see what would emerge from the shadows of doubt. Trust, once shaken, proved as fragile as the paper trails leading back through years of quiet corruption. We'll weather this, Ellie had told Harry that morning. Truth has a way of finding light. He'd looked at her then, really looked at her, seeing perhaps for the first time the strength behind her gentle ways. Yes, he'd said softly. It does. 2 days after Pierce's departure, Ellie sat at her kitchen table with Marta and Reverend June, surrounded by paper and half-drunk cups of coffee. A community concert, Ellie said, pushing forward a rough sketch. Something to bring everyone together. Marta picked up the paper, her eyes brightening. In Calder Hall? That's ambitious. Harry's agreed to open it, and we'll make it a proper Thanksgiving celebration. Music, food, fellowship. Reverend June nodded thoughtfully. The timing's perfect. People need healing right now, not division. They worked through the morning, addressing invitations in careful script. Marta's handwriting flowed across cream-colored paper. You are cordially invited to a community concert of thanks. The children can sing, Ellie said, thinking of her. Class. And we'll ask Mrs. Peterson to coordinate the pie committee. She's been feeling left out lately. Over the next week, the hall came alive with preparation. Children's voices echoed through rehearsals. Over the river and through the woods. They practiced after school, small faces intent with concentration. Little Sarah missed her cue again, and Ellie knelt beside her. Remember what we said about the river part? It's like singing to your favorite teddy bear. Sarah's next try was perfect. In the estate kitchen, Mrs. Peterson directed a small army of pie makers. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the air as women who'd barely spoken since the scandal worked side by side, rolling dough and sharing family recipes. My grandmother swore by a dash of cardamom, Mrs. Wilson confided, and soon recipes were being exchanged like peace offerings. The night of the concert, Calder Hall glowed with warmth. Fairy lights twined around pillars, and fall flowers graced every table. People arrived in their best clothes, carrying covered dishes and nervous smiles. Thomas stood in the doorway, tugging at his borrowed jacket. Ellie straightened his collar. You look handsome, Dad. Feels strange, he mumbled. Being here. You belong here. We all do. Inside, the barriers began to blur. Estate gardeners chatted with local farmers about soil conditions. The housekeeper's daughter shared her cookies with Mrs. Landry's grandchildren. Music wove through it all, folk songs, hymns, and finally the children's choir. Sarah, front and centre, sang her river part perfectly. Harry rose to speak just before intermission. His usual polish was softened somehow, his words less measured and more heartfelt. This town, he began, has shown me what community truly means. He paused, looking out at the faces before him. I inherited this estate, but I failed to inherit my father's wisdom about stewardship. That changes now. He outlined new oversight measures, local board positions, and a commitment to transparent development. But it was his last words that caught in people's throats. My home is your home. Let's rebuild trust together. Thomas wasn't the only one wiping his eyes. During intermission, Ellie headed to the coat room to fetch her shawl. The space was quiet, away from the happy buzz of conversation and clinking plates. Ellie. Harry's voice was soft behind her. She turned, shawl in hand. Harry, I owe you an apology. He stepped closer, his usual reserve cracking. When you first came, I was cold, defensive. You were protecting yourself. No, he said quietly. I was hiding. From responsibility, from connection, from... He gestured to the sounds of laughter filtering through the door. From all this. Ellie saw something new in his eyes. Vulnerability, yes, but also hope. The reading hour, he continued. Watching you with the children, with Mrs. Landry. You showed me what I'd forgotten. That numbers on paper are people's lives. We all forget sometimes, Ellie said gently. What matters is remembering. Their eyes met in the soft darkness of the coat room. For a moment, neither spoke. The music from the hall drifted in, an old hymn about gratitude and grace. Thank you, Harry said simply. Ellie smiled. For what? For reminding me what home means. They returned to the hall separately, but something had shifted. The rest of the evening flowed like honey, sweet, warm, and healing. Children danced with grandparents, old grievances softened over shared desserts, and music filled every corner with joy. That night, Ellie lay in bed, reliving the evening's moments, Sarah's proud smile after her solo, Thomas laughing with his old poker buddies, Harry's genuine warmth as he thanked the performers. Across the estate, Harry sat in his study, a piece of children's artwork from the concert program in his hands. It showed stick figures holding hands around what might have been Calder Hall or might have been home. The morning dawned clear and crisp. Both Ellie and Harry moved through their routines with lighter hearts, carrying the afterglow of community restored. Then the phone rang. The morning sunlight streamed through the estate's dining room windows, casting warm patterns across the morning paper. Ellie sipped her coffee, still holding on to the previous evening's glow, when the phone rang. "Ellie." Marta's voice trembled. "Have you seen the Herald?" Ellie's stomach dropped as she unfolded the newspaper. There, in bold print, "Caldwell marriage, love story or PR scheme?" The article was brutal in its implications. It painted her as a willing participant in a calculated move to rehabilitate the Caldwell image, suggesting the timing of their marriage coincided too perfectly with the development controversy. Anonymous sources hinted at pre-arranged deals and backroom negotiations. Her hands shook as she read. Every tender moment from the concert, every small step toward healing, seemed to wither under the harsh light of public scrutiny. Across town, Thomas sat at his kitchen table, the same article spread before him. His weathered hands gripped the paper's edges. No, he muttered. The room began to spin. A sharp pain squeezed his chest. The coffee cup slipped from his grasp, shattering on the floor. He clutched at his shirt, gasping. Mrs. Peterson next door heard the crash. She found Thomas slumped in his chair, pale and struggling to breathe. Her trembling fingers dialed 911. Ellie was halfway through calling Harry's office when her phone lit up with Mrs. Peterson's number. 20 minutes later, she burst through the hospital's emergency room doors, her heart hammering. "He's stabilized," Dr. Martinez assured her. "The EKG shows signs of angina. We're monitoring him for heart attack risk, but he's responding well to medication." Thomas lay small and grey against the white hospital sheets, tubes snaking from his arms. "I'm sorry," he whispered when she took his hand. "I never meant for any of this." Outside the hospital room, phones buzzed with notifications. Social media exploded with speculation. Local gossip pages shared old photos of Ellie, analyzing her expressions for signs of calculation. Comment sections filled with vicious theories. "Gold digger," wrote one anonymous poster. "Probably planned it all along," suggested another. Harry sat in his study, a tablet displaying the Herald article propped before him. The words blurred as memories shifted. Ellie's careful questions about development plans, her late nights in the library, her quick connection with affected residents. Had it all been orchestrated? Pain and doubt twisted in his chest. The trust he'd just begun to feel crumbled like ash. His secretary knocked softly. "Sir, the Community Centre Committee is waiting for your signature on the new initiatives." "Cancel them," he said flatly. "All of them." "But sir, after last night's announcements, I said cancel them." The next 3 days passed in a blur of beeping monitors and buzzing phones. Ellie split her time between the hospital and dodging reporters who camped outside both Thomas's house and the estate. Her students made get-well cards for Mr. Mercer. She delivered them to his room, where they added spots of color to the sterile walls. Thomas slept more than he talked, medication making him drift. At the estate, Harry retreated into cold formality. When their paths crossed, his responses were clipped, professional. The warmth from the concert night had frozen over. "Harry, please." Ellie tried once, catching him in the hallway. "None of what they're saying is true." "Isn't it?" His voice was ice. "The timing seems remarkably convenient. Your father's involvement, your sudden interest in corporate documents. You know why I came here. You've seen the contract." "Yes, the contract. Very carefully worded, wasn't it? Very precise in its terms. He turned away, leaving Ellie standing alone in the hallway, her heart heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. The town buzzed with tension. At the grocery store, conversations hushed when Ellie passed. Old friends crossed the street to avoid uncomfortable encounters. The community that had just begun to heal was splintering again under the pressure of scandal and suspicion. On the third day, Reverend June found Ellie in the hospital chapel. "People are scared," she said gently, sitting beside her. "When they're scared, they look for simple answers. Heroes, villains. It's easier than seeing the messy truth." Ellie wiped her eyes. "The truth is, my father made a mistake years ago. He tried to fix it the only way he thought he could. And now you're both paying the price of good intentions tangled with shame." Reverend June finished softly. "But shame grows best in silence, child. Remember that." Outside, another news van pulled up to the hospital entrance, its satellite dish reaching toward the grey autumn sky like a metal flower searching for light. The next 3 days brought waves of judgment that crashed against Ellie's carefully built world. Bills arrived at the Mercer house marked "urgent" in angry red letters. The mortgage company left stern voicemails about missed payments. Thomas's medical bills piled up on his kitchen counter like fallen leaves. At Jefferson Elementary, whispers followed Ellie down the hallways. Parents who once greeted her warmly now studied their phones when she passed. During morning drop-off, she overheard snippets that made her chest tight. Using the school for connections. Wonder how long she planned it. Should someone like that be teaching our kids? Principal Walker called her into his office Wednesday morning. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. "Eleanor, you understand we have to consider the school's reputation," he began. "Some parents have expressed concerns." Ellie's hands twisted in her lap. "I've never brought my personal life into my classroom." Of course. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Just keep things low-key for now." The town's social media buzzed like angry hornets. Local Facebook groups dissected every detail of her life. Someone dug up old yearbook photos. Anonymous accounts posted cruel theories about her motives. Marta deleted the worst comments as fast as she could. "Don't read them," she told Ellie firmly. "They're all scared people hiding behind keyboards." At the hospital, Thomas improved physically but sank deeper into despair. The steady stream of visitors brought comfort. Mrs. Peterson's chicken soup, Reverend June's quiet prayers, Dan from the hardware store sitting quietly with racing forms and memories of better days. "I've ruined everything," Thomas whispered when Ellie visited. "Your reputation, your future." "Dad, please don't." "No, listen." His voice cracked. "Don't make it worse. Don't challenge anything they say. Just let it pass." Ellie's attempts to reach Harry met silence. His secretary offered polite excuses. In meetings. On a call. Not available. The warmth they'd shared at the concert felt like a dream she'd imagined. Late Wednesday night, alone in her father's empty house, Ellie found the marriage contract in his desk. 1 year. She'd agreed to 1 year. The weight of months stretched before her like an endless road. Her phone buzzed. Another anonymous message. "Gold digger," in capital letters. She deleted it without reading further. Reverend June arrived Thursday morning with coffee and muffins. She'd been running interference, fielding calls from reporters and redirecting the most aggressive visitors. "The truth has its own timeline," she said, watching Ellie pick at a muffin. "Sometimes we have to trust it to emerge in its own way." But trust felt impossible when everything she'd built seemed to be crumbling. Her students still smiled, still shared their stories and drawings. But their parents' suspicion cast shadows over even those bright moments. By Thursday afternoon, the pressure of silence became unbearable. Ellie sat in her father's hospital room, watching him doze, and made a decision. If Harry wouldn't take her calls, she would go to him. Thomas needed more than just medical healing. He needed to know his desperate gamble hadn't destroyed everything. She gathered her courage like armor and headed for the estate. The truth had its own timeline, yes, but sometimes it needed a little push to start moving. The estate's iron gates loomed ahead as Ellie pulled up in her weathered Honda Civic. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. The security guard recognized her and waved her through without question. She found Harry in his study, surrounded by stacks of papers and laptops displaying financial charts. He looked up, startled by her unannounced arrival. "We need to talk," Ellie said simply. "And then you need to come with me to the hospital." Harry's jaw tightened. "I have meetings." "No." Ellie's voice was quiet but firm. "The meetings can wait. This can't." Something in her tone made him pause. After a long moment, he nodded. "We'll take my car." The Mercedes purred to life, its leather seats cool and pristine. They sat in tense silence as Harry navigated the winding driveway. Ellie stared straight ahead, gathering her thoughts. "I never wanted this to be about PR." She finally said, "When my father told me about the arrangement, I was angry, humiliated. The 1-year contract was my way of keeping some control over my own life." Harry's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Then why agree at all?" "Because sometimes doing the right thing means making hard choices." Ellie turned to face him. "My father made a mistake years ago. He spent decades trying to fix it. The marriage wasn't about smoothing your image. It was about him trying to make amends the only way he thought he could." The highway stretched before them, empty and grey. Harry's expression softened slightly. "These people," Ellie continued, "they're not just headlines or statistics. Mrs. Landry, who brings sugar cookies to school bake sales. Mr. Chen, who fixes everyone's bikes for free. They need real help, not corporate statements or media spin." Harry was quiet for several miles. When he spoke, his voice had lost its defensive edge. The audit revealed more than just Pierce's dealings. There were other decisions, choices I made without really seeing the consequences. "Then see them now," Ellie said gently. "Start there." The hospital parking lot was nearly empty when they arrived. Thomas's room was dim, lit only by the glow of monitoring equipment and the fading afternoon sun. He looked small in the hospital bed, his usual proud bearing diminished by illness and shame. His eyes widened when he saw Harry. "Mr. Caldwell, please." Harry interrupted. "Just Harry." Thomas struggled to sit up straighter. "I owe you an apology. What I did, arranging this marriage without your knowledge, trying to use your position to fix my old wrongs, it wasn't right. I was desperate to make amends before—" He gestured weakly at the hospital room. "But I went about it all wrong." Neither man noticed the young reporter doing follow-up interviews in the hallway, her notebook open as she paused outside the door. "I wanted to protect people," Thomas continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Years ago, I made choices that hurt them. I thought if I could just connect Ellie to someone with real power to help." He shook his head. "Instead, I've hurt my daughter and caused chaos in your life. I'm sorry." The reporter's pen moved quickly across her notepad, capturing every word. Harry moved closer to the bed. "We all make choices we regret, Mr. Mercer. The question is what we do to fix them." "Thomas," the older man corrected with a weak smile. "And right now, all I can do is tell the truth. No more secrets, no more schemes." The tension that had filled the room began to dissolve. Ellie watched as the two men talked, really talked, about intentions and consequences, about responsibility and redemption. The reporter slipped away, her notebook full of quotes that would help reshape the narrative that had spun so wildly out of control. Later, as afternoon faded to evening, Harry and Ellie stood in the hospital hallway. The awkwardness between them had softened into something more contemplative. "I'll have my team start reviewing all the development contracts tomorrow," Harry said. "Full transparency, and we'll set up a community advisory board. People who actually live here should have a voice in what happens to their homes." Ellie nodded. "It's a start." "Yes," Harry agreed quietly. "A start." 2 days after Thomas's hospital apology, Harry stood at the head of the Caldwell Enterprises boardroom. Morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the tense faces around the polished mahogany table. "The audit findings are clear," Harry said, his voice steady. "Our oversight failed. People's homes and lives were put at risk through aggressive buyout tactics and hidden conflicts of interest." Lawrence Pierce shifted in his chair, his usual smooth confidence cracking. Harry met his eyes directly. "Effective immediately, Lawrence Pierce is suspended pending further investigation. All related development projects are frozen for comprehensive legal review." Murmurs rippled through the room. Harry held up a thick document. "This is our public statement acknowledging these failures. It includes specific steps we're taking to correct course." He passed copies to each board member. "The harsh buyout program ends today. In its place, we're establishing a housing trust funded by Caldwell Enterprises." In the school library across town, Ellie sat with Marta and Reverend June, surrounded by community leaders. Coffee cups and notepads covered the tables as they worked, through trust priorities. "Zero displacement has to be the foundation," Marta insisted, tapping her pen for emphasis. "People need to know they won't lose their homes." Mrs. Landry nodded vigorously. "And help with legal papers. Most folks can't afford lawyers to fight these big companies." "Emergency grants too," Reverend June added. "For repairs, medical bills, anything that might force someone to sell." Ellie wrote everything down, her handwriting neat and determined. "We'll make sure the lawyers include all of this in the trust documents." Back at Caldwell Enterprises, Harry's pen moved swiftly across check after check. Emergency housing stabilization funds, real money to back up promises. His assistant carried them to accounting for immediate processing. The town buzzed with cautious optimism as news spread. At the diner, people passed phones showing the public statement. At the grocery store, neighbors discussed the trust details. Hope began to replace fear, though skepticism lingered. "Actions speak louder than words," Mr. Chen said as he fixed a child's bicycle chain. "But at least they're taking action now." In the hospital, Thomas watched local news coverage from his bed. The reporter who'd witnessed his apology had written a balanced piece about family obligations, corporate responsibility, and the complex path to making amends. Ellie visited after school, bringing him tea in a thermos. "The trust documents are almost ready," she told him. "Harry's lawyers are making sure everything's legally binding." Thomas squeezed her hand. "You did what I couldn't, found a way to help that actually works." The week ahead would bring the Trust Center's ribbon-cutting ceremony, carefully timed to coincide with the 1-year anniversary of Harry and Ellie's arrangement. But for now, they focused on the practical work of turning promises into reality. In the estate library that evening, Harry and Ellie reviewed final drafts of the trust documents. Legal language filled page after page, but the heart was simple. Protect homes, help people, rebuild trust. The board signed off on everything, Harry said, sliding the authorization papers across the desk. "Full funding approved." Ellie nodded, relief evident in her shoulders. "The community leaders are ready to serve on the advisory board. They know what people really need." "I should have listened to them from the beginning," Harry admitted. "To you, too." A comfortable silence fell as they continued working. Outside the window, Sunset painted the sky in hopeful shades of pink and gold. Change was coming, not through schemes or secrets, but through honest effort and open hearts. The Trust Center would open its doors in a week, housed in a renovated storefront downtown. Volunteers were already painting walls and arranging furniture. Signs in English and Spanish explained available services. A stack of grant applications waited on a desk, ready to help the first families. The anniversary timing wasn't planned, Ellie said softly, gathering her papers. But maybe it's fitting. Harry looked up from his signing. A different kind of beginning. They worked late into the evening, turning promises into plans, contracts into concrete help. The town might still harbor doubts, but each signature, each legal document, each allocated dollar moved them closer to restored faith. In the days that followed, people began to see real changes. Eviction notices were withdrawn. Grant checks arrived. Legal aid offices opened their doors. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Proof that words could become actions, that wrongs could be made right. In the quiet days before their anniversary, Ellie sat at her desk near an open window, pen hovering over cream-colored paper. The evening breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves as she began to write. Dear Harry, I never planned to send this, but some memories deserve to be captured. Do you remember that first reading hour? The way Mrs. Landry's grandson fell asleep clutching your family's first edition of Peter Rabbit? Or how Jenny Martinez drew that crooked house and wrote Home in rainbow colors? The Thanksgiving concert still makes me smile, watching you struggle to learn This Land Is Your Land on the piano with those determined third graders. Your speech that night wasn't polished or rehearsed, but it was real. I keep thinking about the hospital nights, how you brought Thomas his favorite peppermint tea even though you were angry. And that morning I found the redevelopment article. I was so scared to show you, but something told me you needed to know. Across the estate, Harry sat in his study, opening a leather journal he hadn't touched in years. His precise handwriting filled the page. The library feels different now. Children's laughter echoes where there was only silence. Today I found a paper airplane behind the Shakespeare collection. Some child's secret mission gone astray. It reminded me of James and his origami phase. I've spent years hiding from joy, measuring success in spreadsheets and stakeholder reports. But watching Mrs. Chen teach those kids to fold paper cranes during story hour, I felt something crack open inside me. Hope, maybe, or forgiveness. At the elementary school, Thomas helped sort books for the reading program. His hands, still slightly shaky from medication, carefully repaired torn pages. Teachers who had once whispered behind his back now shared coffee with him during breaks. The trust meeting's at 4. He reminded Principal Santos. I've prepared some suggestions about after-school tutoring space. The morning of their anniversary dawned clear and cool. The estate's grand dining room hummed with conversation as families gathered for brunch. Children darted between tables while parents chatted with neighbors they once thought unreachable. Mrs. Landry, now the Trust's community liaison, helped a young mother fill out housing assistance forms. See here? She explained. This grant can cover your heating bills this winter. In a quiet corner, Ellie and Harry sat with their original contract. One by one, they read the clauses aloud. 1-year duration. Harry began. To ensure my autonomy. Ellie added softly. No interference from external parties. Because trust has to be earned, she said. Mutual respect between parties. Ellie smiled. That one grew into something real. As they reached the final page, Harry set down the paper. The year is up. You're free to go just as we agreed. Ellie looked around the room, at Thomas showing a child how to make paper airplanes, at Marta organizing next week's community classes, at Mrs. Landry's grandson reading to younger children. I'd like to stay, she said simply. Not because of any contract or obligation, but because this work matters. Because we make a good team. Harry's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. Are you sure? I am. She met his eyes. We've built something here, something honest and good. I want to see where it leads. Later that afternoon, they walked together to the Trust Centre. Fall sunshine warmed the newly painted storefront, where a red ribbon stretched across the entrance. The sidewalk filled with townspeople, families who'd received help, volunteers who'd given time, neighbours who'd held on to hope. Mrs. Landry stepped forward with scissors. This centre, she announced, represents more than just housing assistance. It represents what happens when people choose to do better, to be better. The ribbon fluttered in the breeze as Harry and Ellie joined her at the door. Years of distance and mistrust began to dissolve in the simple act of cutting a ribbon, opening a door, choosing to stay. The autumn afternoon sun cast long shadows across the new Trust Centre's freshly painted facade. A crowd gathered on the sidewalk, their excited chatter mixing with the rustle of falling leaves. Red and gold streamers decorated the entrance, and a hand-painted banner proclaimed, "Welcome home," in children's careful letters. Mrs. Landry stood at the front, scissors ready, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Next to her, a group of elementary school students fidgeted in their Sunday best, waiting for their cue to sing. Ready, children? Miss Thompson, the music teacher, raised her hands. The kids burst into "This Little Light of Mine," their sweet voices rising clear and true in the crisp air. Harry watched from the sidelines, his usual rigid posture softening as a little girl in pigtails hit a particularly enthusiastic high note. The ribbon fell away in a clean slice, and applause erupted. People streamed inside, where Marta and Reverend June presided over a massive sheet cake, decorated with tiny houses in frosting. The scent of coffee and fresh-baked cookies filled the air as townspeople and estate staff mingled, their previous divisions forgotten in the warmth of celebration. "Here you are, Mrs. Landry," Ellie said, pressing a set of keys into the widow's weathered hands. "Unit 4B, completely refurbished, and it's yours as long as you want it." Mrs. Landry wrapped Ellie in a fierce hug. "You're an angel, dear. Both of you are," she added, including Harry in her grateful gaze. Near the refreshment table, the groundskeeper's family gathered around their father as he showed off photos of their newly secured home. "No more worrying about next month's rent," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My kids can stay in their schools." The same stray dog that Ellie had fed behind the school all those months ago lay contentedly at her feet, somehow sensing this was where he belonged. Someone had tied a red bow around his neck for the occasion. Harry stepped up to the makeshift podium, clearing his throat. The room quieted, and Ellie noticed how different he looked from that first formal meeting in the drawing room. His tie was slightly loosened, and genuine warmth touched his eyes. "A year ago," he began, "I was running this company from spreadsheets and boardrooms, blind to the real impact of our decisions. Lawrence Pierce took advantage of that distance, using his position to profit from people's hardship. That ends today." He paused, meeting the eyes of those gathered. "This trust isn't charity, it's responsibility. Every family deserves a secure home. Every child deserves stability. I promise you transparency, accountability, and a commitment to this community's well-being. Not because it's good business, but because it's right." As evening approached, the celebration wound down. Ellie found herself on the porch of her modest house, sharing a quiet moment with Thomas. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Remember what I said that night at the festival?" Thomas asked, his voice soft. "When I told you I would change your life?" Ellie nodded, remembering her anger and hurt that night. "I meant it as much as a prayer, as a promise," he continued. I was so desperate to make things right, I almost made them worse. But watching you this past year, you've changed lives, including mine, in ways I never imagined." "Dad," Ellie said, taking his hand. "I understand now, and I forgive you, completely." Later that night, on the estate's back porch, Ellie and Harry sat together in comfortable silence. Cricket song filled the air, and the first stars winked overhead. "I was thinking," Harry said, "about a wedding." Ellie smiled. "Nothing fancy? No spectacle?" he agreed. "Just us, family, and the people who matter. Maybe in the Trust Center's garden, once the flowers bloom." "Perfect," Ellie said. "A reminder of why we're together, to serve this community." She pulled out her planner, already making notes for the new reading program at the Trust Center. Children's laughter echoed in her memory, mixing with Mrs. Landry's tears of joy and the sound of Harry's honest speech. "Sometimes," she thought, watching Harry sketch ideas for the garden, what looks like punishment becomes the doorway to purpose. The stray dog, not so stray anymore, thumped his tail against the porch boards, and somewhere in the distance a choir was practicing for Sunday service. The town was healing, one small miracle at a time.